So I want you to picture this. It is dawn, right in the Ohio Valley.
Oh, yeah. That heavy morning mist.
Exactly. The air is cool, and it's still holding on to that mist that just clings to the river bottoms. And you're standing on this quiet ridgeline above Ohio Brush Creek.
Right.
And as the very first light breaks over the horizon, the shadows start to pull back. And they reveal something just, whoa, absolutely massive right beneath your feet.
It really is staggering.
It's an earthen serpent, nearly a quarter-mile long, uncoiling along the edge of this cliff. The grass is, wet with dew, and as you trace the undulating coils of this massive snake, it's winding back and forth, hugging the natural contours of the land. You follow it all the way up to the head.
And the head is just...
Yeah, there's this open, oval-shaped jaw that appears to be swallowing or maybe disgorging a giant egg. Or maybe it's the sun itself.
Right. The interpretations on that really vary.
But standing there in that early light, the thing that strikes you most isn't just the visual, it's the sheer physical presence of the thing. It's quiet. It demands this kind of immediate respect from anyone who walks near it.
It does. It creates a real sense of spatial gravity. When you encounter monumental earthen architecture from the Woodland period, and we're talking about this massive stretch of time from roughly 500 BCE to about 550 CE, you are forced to reckon with the landscape on entirely new terms.
Yeah, it really reframes everything.
Exactly. We're looking at the Adena burial mounds, the sprawling Hopewell geometric earthworks, the effigy mounds shaped like animals, and of course that famous Serpent Mound. The scale of these structures, it really requires us to approach them with a measured, reverent tone, almost like a documentary.
Like walking into a grand cathedral or a cemetery.
Exactly like that. We're talking about sacred spaces, cemeteries, and celestial calendars.
And I really want to emphasize that tone for you, the listener, today. Because if you have been following along with our Higher Ground series, you know we have spent the last few deep dives exploring this incredibly compelling theory.
The lifeboat theory.
Right. The idea that the great earthen mounds of the Mississippi drainage were essentially life rafts, engineered high ground built to keep a society's food, their seed corn, their leadership safe above catastrophic river floods.
Which is a very real phenomenon in later periods.
It is, and we've been treating those structures like desperate survival technology against this chaotic environment, but I am going to pull the emergency brake right now.
Oh, there we go.
We promised you an honest counterweight in this series. And this is it. These specific mounds, the ones built during this woodland period in the Ohio Valley and beyond, they are not lifeboats. Good history says so out loud.
It absolutely does. And good history requires us to say it out loud. Because if we try to, force every single piece of ancient earthwork into the flood refuge theory, we do a profound disservice to the people who built them.
We'd just be ignoring the facts on the ground.
Right. We have to follow the evidence. And the evidence for the Adena and Hopewell mounds points in a completely different direction. The material record tells us they were not hauling dirt to escape rising water.
Not at all.
No, they were building for the dead, for the sky, and for a deeply complex cosmology. These are overwhelmingly monuments of veneration.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if an Adena conical mound, for example, grows upward over generations, its primary function is memory and reverence, right? It accumulates burials.
Exactly.
And a Hopewell octagon traces astronomical cycles across the landscape. And Serpent Mound, like we just talked about, holds no bodies at all. It is pure symbol.
Right. There's no utilitarian survival aspect to it.
None of this is about keeping seed corn dry. So if this deep dive is the counterweight and these aren't life rafts, the natural question becomes, well, why are we even talking about them in a series focused on how ancient people survived the water?
That's the perfect question. And the answer is, we study them because of the mastery of the craft.
The engineer?
Yes, the engineering. Strip away the ceremonial interpretation for just a moment and look purely at the mechanics of moving the earth. What we see across this 1,000-year span is the accumulation of practical earth-moving genius.
It's basically a slow, steady mastery of applied geometry.
Applied geometry, soil handling, labor coordination, reading the landscape. They're sustaining this highly technical knowledge across 40 generations.
They are essentially writing the textbook on how to move a mountain basket by basket.
That's a great way to put it.
And that is the crux of it for our broader series. That technical inheritance, the sheer engineering vocabulary developed here, is exactly what the later Mississippian city builders will inherit.
Precisely.
When those later cultures build their massive flood basin metropolises, they aren't starting from scratch. They're tapping into 1,000 years of accumulated architectural knowledge. The underlying motive changes from the sacred to survival, but the foundational engineering, that carries forward.
It does. And to understand how they eventually built for survival against the river, we first have to understand how they learned to build for the sacred.
Right.
And to trace how this engineering vocabulary evolved, we have to look at where regular earthen burial mound construction actually began in what is now the United States. We have to move from the abstract shape of the serpent into the staggering physical reality of the conical tombs.
We have to talk about the Adena.
We have to examine the Adena tradition.
Let's start with a quick clarification on that name, though, because Adena is, it's a modern archaeologist's label.
Right. It's not what they call themselves?
No, it is not the name of a unified empire or some single centralized state. It is a term we use to describe a widely shared cultural tradition that emerged in the central Ohio Valley around, 500 BCE?
Roughly 500 BCE, yeah.
Yeah.
And lasted until about 100 CE.
And what fascinates me most about the Adena is the economic engine driving these massive architectural projects.
Oh, it completely upends how we usually think about ancient monuments.
It really does, because when I think about monumental architecture in the ancient world like pyramids, ziggurats, the Great Wall, I immediately think of intensive agriculture.
Sure, grain surpluses.
Right. I picture vast, irrigated fields of grain supporting an army of laborers who are fed by a central state surplus.
That is the classic historical formula. Surplus grain agriculture equals the caloric energy and the freed-up labor required to build monuments.
But the Adena.
The Adena completely subvert that expectation. They were not planting vast fields of maize. Corn wasn't their staple.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. They were gatherers and gardeners of native plants, part of what we call the Eastern Agricultural Complex. So we were talking about things like goosefoot, sunflower, marsh elder, and various starchy and oily seeds.
To build something on the scale of an Adena mound without a high-yield staple crop like corn is just astounding.
It implies a profound, almost microscopic understanding of their local ecology.
They had to manage river valleys, forests, and wild game with incredible efficiency, right? To free up the hundreds of thousands of labor hours required for what they were about to build.
Exactly. They are extracting maximum caloric value from the local flora and fauna to fuel a monumental building program. And what they choose to build with that energy is intensely vertical.
They go straight up.
They do. They take the concept of a human burial and turn it into a dominant geographical feature. Their signature form is the conical burial mound, raised in distinct, carefully planned stages over their honored dead.
And the crowning achievement of this building tradition, the absolute peak of Adena engineering, has to be the Grave Creek Mound in Moundsville, West Virginia.
Constructed in stages around 250 to 150 BCE.
Now, I looked up the dimensions of Grave Creek, and calling it a mound almost diminishes what it actually is.
It doesn't really capture the scale, does it?
Not at all. It is roughly 62 feet high and 240 feet across at the base. We are talking about a 6-story building constructed entirely of earth.
And when we encounter statistics like 62 feet high, it is incredibly easy for the modern mind to just, gloss over the physical reality of that number.
Right, because we have bulldozers.
Exactly. We have excavators that can move that much earth in a matter of weeks. To truly grasp the achievement of the Adena, we have to ground this in what archaeologists call the basket metric.
The basket metric. I love this concept.
It's vital. We have to calculate the human effort required to move approximately 60,000 tons of earth without wheels, without pulleys, and without draft animals.
I really want you to hear that number again. 60,000 tons! And every single cubic yard, that 60,000 tons, was carried on a human back in a woven basket.
That's the reality of it.
I want you to visualize the logistics of that single action. You take local river cane or, heavy grasses, and you weave a sturdy basket. Then you fill it with dense, heavy soil or clay.
And depending on moisture, that's heavy stuff.
Very heavy. That loaded basket now weighs somewhere between 50 and 60 pounds. You hoist it onto your back, likely using a tump line, which is a strap worn across the forehead to distribute the weight down your spine, and you start walking.
You carry that 60-pound load from the borrow pit, which might be hundreds of yards away, to the base of the mound. And as the mound grows, your journey becomes a steep incline.
Oh man, walking up loose dirt.
You are walking up a shifting, loose slope of earth, fighting gravity every step of the way. You reach the designated spot, dump the basket, walk back down, and repeat the process over and over.
Think about carrying a 60-pound bag of concrete mix from your car to your backyard.
It's exhausting.
It's incredibly awkward and physically draining. Now imagine doing that up a 60-foot dirt hill. We are talking about millions of individual basket loads.
Million.
And the physics of a 60-foot dirt cone are incredibly unforgiving. If you simply dump loose topsoil into a giant pile, the first heavy Appalachian rainstorm is going to saturate that soil, increase its weight, and cause massive slumping.
The sides would just wash right away. It would be a mudslide.
Exactly.
And this is where we see the development of that critical technical vocabulary we mentioned. The Adena builders had to deeply understand the mechanics of soil. They had to calculate the angle of repose.
The angle of repose. What is that exactly for those who might not know?
It's essentially the steepest angle at which a sloping surface formed of a particular loose material is stable. Think of pouring dry sand to make a sandcastle versus wet sand. They behave differently.
Right.
To maintain that stability in a 60-foot mound, they couldn't just use one type of dirt. They engineered the internal structure by layering different materials.
Almost like building a modern retaining wall.
Very much like that. They used dense, puddled clays to create waterproof caps over the central tombs, actively directing water away from the core. They used gravels for drainage. They essentially built internal retaining walls out of varied soils to ensure the structure would survive the centuries.
It is an engineering marvel disguised as a simple geometric shape. But, you know, the social organization required is just as impressive to me as the structural physics.
How so?
Well, how do you coordinate that much labor? You have to feed those workers, meaning you have to organize their construction schedules around the seasonal harvesting of the goosefoot and sunflowers.
Oh, absolutely. The logistics are mind-boggling.
You are managing thousands of people without written spreadsheets or digital calendars, driven entirely by a shared cultural purpose.
And that shared cultural purpose brings us to the very heart of these conical mounds. Because beneath those 60,000 tons of carefully engineered earth, at the core of the structure, you find log tombs, cremations, and richly furnished burials.
These are not just engineering case studies.
Yeah, they are cities of the dead.
We really have to maintain that reverence we established earlier. These are cemeteries. They're deeply sacred ground to descendant native nations today.
Yes, and when a community decides to invest millions of hours of grueling physical labor to cover a tomb, they are executing a profound philosophical statement.
It's not something you do casually.
Not at all. They are taking their honored dead and physically integrating them into the permanent architecture of the world. The mound becomes a multi-generational beacon of memory.
It anchors the community to that specific geography.
It does. It signals to anyone who enters that valley that the ancestors are present, they are part of the earth, and they are monumental.
It is an absolute refusal to let the dead fade into obscurity. I mean, you cannot ignore a 60-foot hill on a flat river terrace.
You really can't.
But as we move forward in time, this technical vocabulary of basket loading and soil mechanics begins to expand. The cultures that follow take these earth-moving skills and decide to apply them in a radically different way.
Right, there's a big shift.
The Adena build upward to honor the dead, but the subsequent tradition begins to build outward. They take the earth and tie it not just to memory, but to the cosmos itself.
Yes, we are transitioning into what is known as the Hopewell tradition. And this spans roughly 100 BCE to 500 CE.
And just as with the Adena, Hopewell is another label of convenience, right?
Yes, very much so.
Mordecai Hopewell was simply a 19th century farmer who owned land in Ohio where a major mound group was excavated. So it sounds like a centralized colonial empire, but it's actually this widely shared sphere of ceremonial, architectural, and artistic practices that layered over the existing woodland populations.
That's exactly right. And these distinct communities took the muscle memory of the basket, the logistical knowledge of how to move mountains of dirt, and applied it to staggering pure geometry.
They moved from the vertical cone to enormous horizontal enclosures.
Enclosures that defy belief, really.
Yeah.
We are talking about perfect circles, perfect squares, and perfect octagons covering hundreds of acres.
The scale is almost impossible to comprehend unless you walk the grounds. Like, take the Newark Earthworks in Licking County, Ohio.
Oh, Newark is just incredible.
This was once the largest set of geometric earthworks on the planet. It covered several square miles of terrain. And in September 2023, the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks, which includes Newark and 7 other complexes, was officially inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Which is a huge deal.
It is. It puts these earthen structures on the exact same recognized tier of human achievement as Stonehenge or the pyramids of Giza.
And deservedly so. Because the surveying required to execute these designs goes far beyond simply moving dirt. Laying out a perfect circle with a diameter of over 1,000 feet is a massive mathematical challenge.
Especially across uneven ground.
Right. Doing it across undulating terrain, dealing with hills, valleys, and forests without modern optical surveying equipment like a theodolite is a masterpiece of applied geometry.
How do they even do it?
They likely use central stakes, long woven cords of standardized lengths, and an incredibly sophisticated understanding of line of sight to ensure the earthen walls were perfectly symmetrical.
I was looking at the astronomical data on the Newark Octagon, and this is where the engineering transcends simple geometry for me.
Yes, the astronomical alignment.
They aren't just drawing shapes to demonstrate mathematical prowess. The geometry is inextricably tied to the sky. And they aren't tracking something relatively simple like the sun.
Tracking the solar solstice is straightforward, relatively speaking.
Right. The sun hits its northernmost or southernmost point on the horizon once a year. You can map that out in a few seasons. But the octagon is tied to the moon, which has this deeply complex orbital wobble.
Yes. The moon's orbit is tilted relative to the Earth's orbit around the sun, and that tilt rotates over time. Because of this orbital wobble, the points on the horizon where the moon rises and sets shift back and forth over a long, slow cycle. Astronomers call this the lunar standstill cycle.
The length of that cycle is what just staggers me.
It's an enormous time frame.
It takes 18.6 years for the moon to reach its maximum northern rising and setting point, and then swing all the way back to its minimum. That means a single observer might only witness the full pattern 2 or 3 times in their entire adult life.
Think about what that means for a society without written records. To confirm that cycle, to be mathematically certain of the horizon points before you commit millions of baskets of earth to memorialize it, requires multi-generational observation.
You'd have to pass it down flawlessly.
Someone has to dedicate 20 years of their life to watching the moon, mark the absolute limits of its travel on the horizon, and then pass that specific data down to the next generation. And then the next generation has to verify those marks over another 20 years.
You would need a specialized class of sky watchers passing down an oral tradition of highly technical astronomical data.
Precisely.
And once they finally verified this abstract, invisible 18.6-year rhythm, they translated it into a massive earthen octagon. The sightlines of the Newark Octagon, if you look through specific gateways and across the geometric vertices, they align flawlessly with that maximum northern moonrise.
It is cosmology rendered in Earth. It pulls the deep, slow rhythms of the heavens down into the soil, physically binding the community to the sky. Walking through those earthen walls meant walking through a calendar written by your ancestors to track the movements of the universe.
Wow.
It is high-level theoretical astronomy expressed through the medium of the 50-pound woven basket.
But, building these celestial calendars and conducting the ceremonies inside them required materials that the Ohio Valley simply did not possess.
They needed more than local resources.
Exactly. You can't furnish these sacred spaces using only local wood and stone. And this necessity triggers one of the most astonishing trade networks in the ancient world.
What we call the Hopewell interaction sphere. It was a continent-spanning web of trade, belief, and shared ritual.
And when we say continent spanning, we mean it literally. If you look at a map of North America, the central Ohio Valley, the Scioto, the Muskingum, the Ohio rivers, acts as the hub.
The center of the wheel.
From that hub, they established supply lines stretching thousands of miles in every direction. They reached all the way to the Rocky Mountains in present-day Wyoming to harvest obsidian, a black volcanic glass.
Which is just an incredible distance. They moved north to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan along the shores of the Great Lakes to extract pure, naturally occurring copper.
They forged roots deep into the southern Appalachian Mountains to gather mica, this mineral that naturally sheets off in beautiful, reflective, mirror-like flakes.
And they traveled hundreds of miles south down the Mississippi River system to the Gulf Coast to collect marine shells and shark teeth.
All of these materials, obsidian, copper, mica, shark teeth, are flowing across thousands of miles of plains, mountain ranges, and river systems.
It's a massive logistical undertaking.
And they are moving against river currents in dugout canoes, carrying heavy loads over overland portages, all without horses or wagons. The logistics of moving a fragile volcanic glass from Yellowstone to Ohio by foot and canoe is staggering.
The physical movement of these materials is impressive, but the most revealing aspect is what happened to these goods once they arrived in Ohio.
Right.
Because in many ancient trade networks, societies trade for pure utility. You endure the danger of a long-distance trade route to acquire better bronze for stronger plows, or salt to preserve meat for the winter. You trade to survive.
And I always try to look at these networks through a lens of survival, but the Hopewell materials completely defy that logic.
They really do.
The obsidian from the Rockies isn't being chipped into everyday hunting points to take down deer. The copper isn't being forged into agricultural tools to make farming easier. The mica serves zero structural purpose.
None at all. These exotic, hard-won raw materials were reserved almost exclusively for extraordinary ceremonial art. Master artisans worked the copper into intricate falcons and headdresses. They delicately cut the reflective mica into the shapes of human hands or talons.
Which are beautiful to see in museums today.
Breathtaking.
Yeah.
And they crafted massive ceremonial obsidian blades that were far too brittle to be used in actual combat or butchery.
Now, I could play devil's advocate here and argue that, well, social cohesion is a form of survival.
Okay, let's hear it.
If trading for obsidian builds alliances with distant tribes, maybe that alliance prevents a war. Isn't that just as utilitarian as trading for grain?
That is a very valid way to look at the socio-political function of trade. Building a shared religious and artistic framework across a continent certainly minimizes conflict. But the final destination of these artifacts pushes back against pure utilitarianism.
How so?
Because after pouring all this incredible artistry into these exotic materials, after traveling thousands of miles to secure them,
Yeah.
they buried them.
They just buried them.
Yes. They placed these masterpieces in the log tombs alongside their honored dead and coaxed them with thousands of tons of earth.
When a society expends that much caloric energy and faces that much physical danger to acquire materials from the edges of their known world, only to turn those materials into art and place them in a grave, they are giving us an unambiguous map of their value system.
What's fascinating here is that it proves these earthworks were expressions of profound spiritual and social order, not granaries or survival bunkers.
Right.
The interaction sphere is an economy of the sacred. The very act of pilgrimage, of moving the material across the landscape, was likely as important as the material itself. It wove the continent together through shared belief.
So we have the Adena building upward to anchor memory to the Earth, and the Hopewell building outward to capture the staggering geometry of the moon, all fueled by this continent-spanning network of sacred trade.
An incredible era of construction.
It is. These traditions represent supreme order, precise measurement, and astronomical alignment. But there is another category of earthworks from this broader woodland era that completely discards the rigid math.
Oh, the effigies.
Yes, these are forms that represent pure enigmatic symbolism, and they bring us back to where we started our deep dive today. The dawn light on the ridgeline in Adams County, Ohio.
Serpent Mound. It is the largest surviving effigy earthwork in the world.
And the modern consensus on its length, depending on exactly how you trace the undulating coils with a tape measure, hovers around 1,348 feet.
That's over a quarter mile.
Right. But unlike the towering presence of Grave Creek Mound, the height of the serpent is surprisingly modest. It ranges from just a few inches tall in some sections to a little over 3 feet high. It doesn't dominate the skyline. It hugs the contours of the earth, and it holds the biggest mystery of all. There are no bodies inside it.
None. It is entirely symbolic.
And the absence of burials and the lack of diagnostic artifacts inside the mound structure leads to the most hotly debated question in North American archaeology regarding these sites.
When exactly was it built?
Exactly. I promised at the start of this deep dive that we would be an honest counterweight, and part of being honest is admitting when the science is not settled. The date of Serpent Mound is a genuine, unresolved scholarly dispute. It is an open argument spanning a massive 1,000-year gap.
It is a fascinating debate, too. Both sides have compelling scientific data. For a long time, the traditional attribution linked Serpent Mound to the Adena tradition, largely due to spatial proximity.
Meaning they were close to other Adena sites.
Right. There are definitive Adena conical burial mounds located very close to the Serpent. It stood to reason that the same culture, utilizing that specific landscape, built both structures.
But the science of radiocarbon dating threw a massive wrench into that assumption. In the 1990s, an excavation team recovered pieces of charcoal from within the mound structure itself.
And what did that show?
When they ran the radiocarbon dating on that charcoal, the results came back at approximately 1070 CE.
Which is a problem, chronologically speaking. The Adena tradition faded out around 100 CE. A date of 1070 CE places the construction squarely in what is known as the Fort Ancient period, well over 1,000 years later.
Over 1,000 years later.
Yes. If that charcoal date accurately represents the original construction, the people who built Serpent Mound were entirely different from the people who built the Grave Creek Mound or the Newark Earthworks.
When I first read that, I thought, well, the charcoal doesn't lie, right? Radiocarbon dating measures the decay of carbon-14. It's hard science. But why would there be such a massive pushback against that date?
Because earthen mounds are incredibly complex stratigraphic environments. Science is iterative, and dating soil is notoriously difficult. In 2014, another team conducted a new assessment.
And they took a different approach.
They did. Instead of relying on isolated pieces of charcoal, they took deep core samples and tested the organic sediment. That's the microscopic bits of decayed plant matter mixed into the dirt used to build the mound.
And the radiocarbon dating on the sediment came back at roughly 300 BCE, swinging the pendulum violently back to the Adena tradition.
Yes, it did.
So how do we reconcile two hard scientific dates that are 1,300 years apart? I mean, how does that happen?
Well, proponents of the older Adena date argue that the charcoal from 1070 CE was evidence of a later repair.
Oh, like someone came along later and fixed it up.
Exactly. Imagine a later culture, the Fort Ancient people, moving into the valley, finding this massive ancient earthen snake, and deciding to clear the brush and repair the eroding walls, leaving their charcoal fires behind in the upper layers.
That makes a lot of sense.
But on the other hand, critics of the 2014 study point out that if you dig up old topsoil to build a new mound in 1070 CE, the organic sediment inside that dirt is still going to date to 300 BCE.
Because the dirt itself is old.
Exactly. You are dating the old dirt, not the new construction event.
It's the old wood problem applied to soil. So what does this mean for our understanding of the site? It means we have to be comfortable with the unknown. The Serpent's age remains a mystery. Was it an ancient Adena creation maintained by later peoples, or a Fort Ancient creation built with old earth? History isn't always settled math.
It rarely is, honestly, and Serpent Mound isn't the only symbolic earthwork that challenges our interpretations. If we move forward in time and shift our geography to the northwest, to the upper Mississippi Valley in present-day Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, and Illinois,
we find another incredible explosion of effigy mounds.
we do, built by later woodland peoples between 700 and 1100 CE.
And instead of geometric enclosures, these societies are shaping low mounds into massive animal forms. We see birds with vast wingspans, bears walking across the landscape, panthers, and even water spirits.
But there is a geographic thread here that connects directly back to the core premise of our Higher Ground series.
And this is the part I was waiting for. These effigy mounds, and indeed many woodland mounds, cluster in very specific locations. They are consistently strung along high river terraces, bluffs, and natural levees, looking down over the water.
They are undeniably built on high, dry ground above the river valleys.
So I have to ask the obvious question. If they are building these massive structures, specifically on high, dry ground above floodplains, doesn't this heavily imply they are seeking high ground to escape the water? Doesn't that breathe life back into the flood refuge theory?
It's a tempting conclusion, but this is where we must apply extreme nuance.
Yeah.
Are they building on dry ground? Yes. Is dry ground practically easier to build an earthwork on because the soil isn't saturated and the structure won't wash away in a seasonal flood?
Yeah.
But we cannot leap to the conclusion that a mound shaped like a bear overlooking a river was intended as a survival lifeboat for grain.
So the siting is deliberate, but the function isn't utilitarian.
Exactly. The choice of location is far more likely about sightlines and the spiritual power of overlooking a river valley. The river is the main artery of life, travel, and trade. Placing your sacred ancestors or your massive symbolic effigies on the bluff overlooking that artery is a profound statement of territorial and spiritual presence.
It makes me think of medieval architecture in Europe. You put a towering cathedral on the highest hill in the center of the town so it can be seen from miles away, so it presides over the daily life of the landscape. You don't put it on the hill just because the hill doesn't flood.
That is an excellent analogy. The location on the river terraces shows a deep continuity of where people chose to build, but it does not prove these specific structures were refuges.
Let's step back for a second and look at the vast tapestry we have unrolled today. We have the Adena engineering 60-foot vertical cones over their dead. We have the Hopewell tracking the complex 18.6-year lunar standstill with flawless earthen octagons, fueling their ceremonies by hauling obsidian and copper across a continent.
It's a staggering amount of human effort.
We have the enigmatic Serpent Mound holding its secrets and massive bear effigies watching over the Mississippi River bluffs. It is a staggering era of monumental construction.
But like all grand eras, the Woodland period eventually transitions. Right around 500 to 550 CE, the massive Hopewell ceremonial system fades. The construction of giant geometric earthworks stops.
The continent-spanning interaction sphere goes quiet.
The flow of exotic materials ceases.
Now, the reasons for this decline are heavily debated, but there is no evidence of a dramatic, violent catastrophe, right? It wasn't an invasion that wiped them out.
No, there are no villains here. It appears to be a complex combination of factors. Social dynamics within the communities may have shifted. Local exchange networks might have strengthened, making the dangerous long-distance trade routes obsolete.
Or maybe environmental shifts.
Exactly. There may have been localized environmental changes that altered their forging yields, requiring a shift in how they spent their caloric energy. But the crucial point is that the people did not vanish. The woodland life continued in altered, perhaps more localized forms.
They stopped building the giant octagons, but the underlying knowledge didn't evaporate. And this brings us to the core argument of our deep dive today.
The inheritance.
Yes, the grand inheritance. The overarching motive for building these specific cities of the dead and temples of the sky may have faded, but the craft itself carried forward.
For 1,000 years, these populations had meticulously passed down a highly complex technical vocabulary of earth-moving. They had mastered the physics of soil mechanics.
They knew exactly how to weave the optimal basket, how to load it, and how to carry it efficiently.
They knew how to organize a labor force of thousands purely through shared cultural gravity, without coercion. They knew how to calculate the angle of repose and how to layer clays and gravels so a massive structure wouldn't collapse in a storm.
It reminds me of the medieval stonemason guilds, passing down the secrets of architectural geometry and structural load-bearing from master to apprentice over centuries. Even if a specific kingdom fell and stopped funding cathedrals, the guilds retained the knowledge of how to cut the stone and build the arch.
The woodland builders retained the knowledge of the basket and the soil.
And that accumulated knowledge is the grand inheritance of North America. Because when we move forward into the next phase of history, when the Mississippian world of episodes 4 through 6 arises, those people are going to face a very different set of environmental challenges.
They're going to have to deal with water.
They are going to start building massive platform mound structures designed to elevate living spaces and temples. We are talking about structures like Monk's Mound at Cahokia, which is 100 feet of engineered earth, with a base footprint larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza.
It's unbelievable scale.
And they're going to build these massive structures right on the unstable soils of the flood basins.
And when the Mississippians start constructing those massive platform mounds to survive the river floods, they are not inventing the engineering from scratch.
They aren't just figuring it out as they go.
Not at all. They aren't looking at a pile of wet mud and wondering how to make it stack 100 feet high. They already know. They inherited a mature, road-tested technical vocabulary from the Adena conical builders, from the Hopewell geometric surveyors, and from the effigy builders.
They take the structural skills developed to honor the dead, and they pivot those skills toward the survival of the living. They take the geometry of the moon and the waterproofing clays of the burial cone, and they apply them to the brutal reality of the river flood. The motive shifts entirely from cosmology to survival. But the hands, the woven baskets, the calculation of the soil, that is an unbroken, continuous line.
The woodland era was the training ground.
They built cities for the dead, so their descendants possessed the tools to build cities for the living.
It is a profound legacy of human labor and ingenuity.
As we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We started this hour looking at Serpent Mound at dawn, a monument of pure symbol. We have traced the movement of millions of woven baskets of earth.
Mountains of Earth, really.
We've talked about people hauling volcanic glass from Wyoming to Ohio by foot and canoe. We've discussed generations of skywatchers patiently tracking the moon's wobble across the horizon for nearly 20 years, just to draw a perfect octagon in the dirt.
Oh, without writing it down.
All of this was accomplished without the wheel, without draft animals, and without a written alphabet. They organized massive, multi-generational labor forces entirely in the service of cosmology, memory, and belief. Just makes you wonder.
I wonder what.
Well, if an ancient society could organize across decades and centuries, driven purely by a shared cosmic vision rather than immediate utilitarian survival needs, what monumental, multi-generational projects could our modern society accomplish?
That's a great question.
If we weren't driven primarily by quarterly profit reports or immediate political cycles or the utilitarian need to just get by, what could we build together? What would be our era's equivalent of an 18.6-year moon tracker made of Earth? Think about that the next time you look up at the moon.